this little thing off of the bottom here. There we go. Okay. So hello, career thought leaders. Good to see you. We are going to be talking about gigs and gaps in resumes. So what do we do we've got clients that have short little gigs of work, or they have gaps in their resume. What do we want to do with that? So here's the thing. There's a lot of talk about how it doesn't matter if someone has resume, that employers don't care about that anymore because of COVID. There's some data from 2018, 2019 that shows that's not true. And then there's some newer data from 2022 that shows that that may not be true. Although this 22 data has some pretty interesting suggestions that we're going to talk through today about using years. So like 4 years experience at a job instead of dates 2018 to 2022. And we'll talk about when that might be appropriate and when it might not be appropriate, and how you might want to experiment with that with your clients, and let me know what you find out. So when we think about a client that's had a lot of short-term jobs, in the past, we would have worried about that person being dubbed a job hopper, the hiring managers worrying about whether or not they'll stay. And that might not be as much of an issue today, depending on, of course, the age and industry of the person that is reading your resume. However, it still detracts from what is really important about our client, which isn't usually where they've worked or how long they worked somewhere, but what their title was and how long they've been in that type of work. Importantly, of course, the accomplishments and the type of duties, if you will. Although we don't write about duties, right? We write about scope and we write about accomplishments. Those are what people really care about in the resume, not, the dates and titles and all of those. They matter, but when we list the same things over and over again, it just feels really choppy, and it's hard to focus on what does really matter, which are those accomplishments and what someone has done. So if someone has a bunch of short-term jobs, we still want to think about how we can make that resume easy to read, easy to find the information that's most important. Maybe more importantly today, hiding those and not having the person look like it be our goal, and yet the outcome and the strategies are still going to be the same. And we're going to look at a couple of those things. So if you have a lot of clients that have those short-term gig jobs, drop a yes in the chat. Let me know that you've got some gigs. You can put gigs in the chat. If you've got people that are having short-term jobs or maybe multiple jobs on top of each other, and how are we going to handle that? We're going to look at some resumes in just a minute. The other thing that we're going to look at is some of the data around gaps and what that really looks like, and what we want to be talking about with our clients when they have gaps. And it's interesting, people are saying, oh, the gaps don't matter, and we want to see the months. And then there's this research that says perhaps we throw all of that out the window. So hi, it's good to see you all. Thank you for coming. Hi, Carol, good to see you, Carol. And let me know if you're seeing people that have gigs or short-term jobs, and then if you're still seeing people that maybe have gaps and are trying to figure out how to make that look like they want it to look on their resume, and of course their LinkedIn profile. A lot of the information that I'm going to share today is more related to resumes, but then we'll talk about how you might do that on a LinkedIn profile as well. Gigs and gaps. 6 months ago, I want to say maybe 6 months ago, we did a whole 2-hour session on gigs and gaps, and we went through some resume samples, and we talked about what all of those pieces can look like for clients that are in those situations. Obviously, I don't have time to go through all of that today, so if you're interested in that mastery session, I'll drop the link down below. So when we think about gigs, this might happen in a few different ways, right? We might have people that have multiple jobs at the same time. They might have a side gig while they're doing their day job, or they might just have several short-term jobs, or they might have actual gigs, right? Maybe they're a freelancer and they're doing writing work or whatever they're doing. And usually our challenge is that the person comes in with this is what I've been doing. And they kind of like, bleh, right? These are all the things that I've been doing. Our challenge is that, in a sense, that doesn't really matter. And it's really hard to decide what goes and what stays and what's the focus and what's not, if that's where we start. This is all the stuff that I have, right? Here's the kitchen sink. Help me put it together. What we need is the vision. Where are they going? So if you think about it in terms of, building a piece of furniture, you want to look at what that final piece of furniture is going to look like first. Otherwise, you end up with something backwards. Not that any of us have ever done that, where, we put a piece of furniture together and like, oh, that piece is backwards. And probably if I would have looked at the big picture first, I would have seen that this piece doesn't go right there. I don't know. Anybody build furniture? Is that your favorite thing to do or not? Yes or no? You put that in the chat. Do you like to build those, piece it together by yourself furnitures? Yes or no? I feel like in the world of you get everything by mail today, it's even more, I've put together more pieces of furniture in the last year than I ever thought I would, because that just seems to be the way of the world now. So whether you love it or hate it, I can pretty much guarantee that we all will do a better job if we've looked at the final picture first and really have an idea of what that is supposed to look like, right? And so that's what we want to think about with a resume that has all pieces. We first need to know, what's the end goal, right? What are you wanting to put together this for? What are we aiming for? Because then we can decide which pieces of the puzzle matter and how much do they matter, and which things are going to go, in first, and which things are going to get the most view. Because when we don't have that focus, what happens is that we end up with a lot of stuff pieced together in a way that doesn't make sense for anybody on the other side, right? It comes together and it maybe even doesn't stay together. If we want to use the furniture example, it doesn't stay together well, or it looks funky because we didn't have that end goal in mind. And so I'm going to show you a few examples. I've got a few higher level examples, and then I've got a few not so high level examples that, more hands-on types of workers. So we can look at those and see how the pieces come together. So let me know as we go through here if there's any other specific questions you have, and we can talk through those as well. We're going to start with the gigs as soon as I can share my screen here. Good to see you all. Thank you. Putting together a toy right now. Had to look at the whole thing first so I wouldn't run out of screws, right? We got to look at all the pieces, but we also have to look at the vision. I love that. It's a skill. Okay, so we have to know where they're aiming for first. Of course, this is not letting me look what I want to look at. Let me do it this way. Okay. Here we go. So this was a resume that I did for someone a while ago, but they were a startup person. And this often happens with startup people or consultants, or where they have all of these short-term jobs. And so what I did for this person, and you could do this for someone who worked gig jobs for a staffing firm. You could do this with people that have done all different kinds of things. But in this green header is the type of work the person was doing. And this brings it all together, right? It says, this is the type of work that I was doing from 2020 to present. And so if someone's been, in an administrative work for several different staffing firms, we could do this. If someone's been doing CFO work on contract, we could do this. And you could put the CFO work here. You could even put the name of the firms here. I like to use what I call a smush and slash. So you could smush and slash the firms up there in that section. No bold, right? Don't draw attention. And then you could use kind of project language here, or even skills language here, to highlight specific projects or specific skill sets that they have, instead of, with this one, we were looking at specific companies that the person had worked with, specific startups. So when you're thinking about this piece of work, you want to figure out what's the best way to group the items, right? Am I going to group them by type of work? like that example I was just showing? Am I going to group them by maybe types of projects? I could group them by types of companies, and I could smush and slash companies together and then put the information down below that. And you might say, how is that going to parse into ATS? And one, it will parse. It will look a little funky. The company names might go together in the company name place, and then the job title will be there. And so you've got to, kind of think about that. But when you're working with someone that's got gigs and gaps, you're doing your best to make them look like that consistent worker, to show their skills in chunks, because that's easier for people to read. And yes, we want to think about an applicant tracking system, but in general, these folks are going to be networking. They may have to adjust the application after the resume dumps into the applicant tracking system. So don't over stress about that. Most of the time it works out and pretty nicely anyways, because you're still doing kind of title, company, dates. You're just doing it in a little bit different format. This person was a high-level consultant, and he wasn't really worried about that. So we want to consider it, but you don't want to make it your end all be all, because your goal is to help this person put together a cohesive story. And most of the time you can still do that in a way that an applicant tracking system can read. So I like to group it by the type of work or title. So if they had a title at several different organizations, we can smush and slash those and then put a date range. If you've got a lot of gaps in that date range, that may not work, or you might want to put, like 2018 to 2020 and 2021 to 2022, so you can be realistic with that and about that date, still not have to list things out with every little detail, because that's not where you want the focus. You want the focus on what they did, not on the 4 different organization mergers that happened or whatever it might be. So focusing it by the type of work can be really helpful. Sometimes we'll do that in an overall section. So you might have we had someone in our Facebook group that was asking about political work and that they'd been kind of doing on this thread while they'd been having the steady job, right? So I've got my day job, and then I've been doing this political work over here. Now I want to go for a political job. So I'm going to take that political work and make it its own section, political consulting or whatever that might be, group all of that work together, and then have an additional section below that has, technical. I think the person had been a technical leader or something. So might have a separate section that says technical work experience and have all of those technology jobs down there as well. And so you've got these 2 pieces that you have to figure out what matters, because if the person's going for a technical job, that political work may not be on the resume, or it may be at the bottom. But since they're going for a political consulting job, that's the main focus. We're going to put those jobs together in a section, make them, look and sound like jobs, even if they were volunteer, and then have that technical work as the secondary instead of the primary. If we don't have a focus, we can't make those decisions. And a lot of times we've got people with a lot of gigs, that's not necessarily the gigs. The challenge is, what is the focus for this resume? And then let's build it to really highlight that part of the resume. So when we think about that gig work, let me pull up this other resume I have. That was from a client who was in military contracting, and just a little bit different, right? He'd been at all of these different Army bases, and the just a job hopping doesn't really look like job hopping then, right? But we're going to put that together and see how we can make the person look very consistent, even though they may have been job hopping, or even though they may have been at many different locations, they weren't really job hopping. So we kept it by the organization and then had those pieces coming together. And of course, now my computer's messing up with the share, but we'll get there. Any other types of job hopping that you are all seeing, feel free to drop that in the chat and we can talk through that. I love to do that. And then we'll move into the gaps, and we may end up going to the gaps and then coming back to this if my computer's not going to let me share. Let me see. Okay, here we go. Yay. All right. So this one, like I said, was a little bit someone who's a firefighter paramedic and had been doing that for government contract organizations and been on all of these different bases and things working for the National Science Foundation as well as the Army. So we grouped all of the wheres and whos here and really focused on the what. And then we had, of course, their accomplishments here. And this feels a little bit big. It's kind of hard to see, but you focus, again, you kind of condense where you can condense and then bring the focus where you want to bring the focus. And instead of having to list out every single base and every single area that the person had been in, we could focus on what they did there and then have that information shine instead of all these different places they'd been. Every 6 months they were going to a new base, and we didn't want to list all of those out because it didn't add the value that they were looking for, especially now moving into a different organization that still cared about that this is where they had been, but not as much as that organization did. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about gaps. And you may have seen this research. So I wrote an article maybe a year ago now, where I shared some of the research around gaps from 2018, 2019, and what that looks like. So I'm going to pull up that article and we'll walk through some of the data, and then we will see where we are from there. Let's see here. Okay, here we go. So in this article, the 4 old resume questions that we always get, and you can come in here and look at the cover letter and 1 page versus 2 page and all of that if you haven't seen this article. But then we talk about gaps. So this research was done in 2019, and it said that if you had a gap, the longer your gap was, the more you were the less likely you are to get a call back, right? Is this surprising? Yes, if it's surprising. No, if it's not surprising. You drop that in the chat. Just let me know you're still here. You can't hear me. Anyone else? Oh, no, you can see the example. All right, well, we'll get that fixed in the video. I'll post that up there as well. Hopefully you can see this where you've got the article there. Let me see if I can make that a little bit bigger. So this is the data on the callback rates by gap length. And I'll put the link in the chat, although it doesn't go through to all of you. Oh yeah, there we go. Okay, so I'll put that link in the chat. I'll have to go around and put it in LinkedIn. I don't think LinkedIn you'll see that link in LinkedIn, but I can come through and put it back there. So this just shows that the callbacks really drop off after that much of a gap. So if you have someone that has a 7-month gap, you have a few options. And if they had a short-term job before that, how important was that job? How relevant was that short-term job? Do you want to put it on the resume or not? If you put it on the resume and you want to show that gap, you can. You just want to think about what the implications are. So let's look at the best ways to fill a gap. And that was the other part of this strategy here. So the best way to fill a gap by far is the receiving training and education. So what I would do if I had someone that had a 7-month gap is put in that other job if it was relevant, put in the end month if they feel like they need to, depending on the client and what industry they're in. Sometimes I'll just use years and experiment with that. Sometimes we'll use month and years. It depends on the person. Month and year is preferred by a lot of recruiters, but that makes me laugh because they say they don't care about gaps, but yet they want to know the month. Well, the only reason you would want to know a month is to see if there's a gap. And if you don't care about it, why do you want to see it? So it's like a catch-22, right? Do what you and your client decide you want to do. You could use the years. Years feels a little bit, it's pushing it a little bit when you've only been there for 4 months. So we might put those months. Then I'm going to put in some education to fill that gap. And I could have that person start a certificate today, right? that today they're going to launch into a certificate program or an online free course on whatever their job target is. They're going to start doing the projects that go along with that, so they have bullets to put into it. They're going to really not just have something to fill their resume in, but they're going to do the work to show that they've got the skills that they want an employer to see that they have. And this would be an important part of their job search if they've got a 7 months gap, because we know that especially after 6 months, but even again after 9, you get those drop-offs in callbacks. So start a course now, get there in there to fill the gap. And of course, any other ways that they can with consulting, free work, volunteer work that's relevant, anything they can do to fill that gap. The last ditch kind of efforts here, if they want to put that they were doing family care, caring for family members, they can use a one-liner for that to fill the gap. But as you can see, the difference here, it's much better if they can use education to fill that gap instead of the family care. And I've lost all of your comments. I just lost all of your comments because my page refreshed. So let me see. I don't think there's any way for me to get them. So if you asked a question about this, feel free to ask the question again, because I lost you all there for a minute. But the best way to fill the gap is with education. Of course, the really best way to fill a gap is to not have it look like a gap. That means using unpaid work experience, volunteer experience, relevant consulting, whatever we can to build an employment for that person, a current valid thing they can talk about, so that they don't look like they have a gap at all. That's the best case scenario. Second best case scenario is that they fill it with education, and then you've got the other pieces here that they can fill it with as well in terms of family care. Usually I just use a one-liner on that, unless something they were doing during that time is particularly relevant towards the job that they're aiming for. Otherwise, it's just a one-liner, show what they were doing during the gap, and then take the rest of the space on the resume to really focus on their relevant skills and accomplishments from the work that they have that is relevant towards the job that they're aiming for. Yeah, it keeps breaking when I post a link right now, so I'll post that link afterwards. If you've commented, you'll get a notice when I post that link in your LinkedIn stuff, but unfortunately it keeps breaking when I post that link. It's really not the hardest thing to find, because if you go to my LinkedIn profile, Marie Zimenoff, I'm the only Marie Zimenoff on LinkedIn. If you go to that and then you go to my articles, you'll find it pretty easily. But I will post the link later. It keeps breaking the system when I post it right now for some reason. So this is the data on gaps that, as I said, was from 2019. And I think we're done with that. So you can go and look at that, and it'll show you the drop off in callbacks. It'll show you the reasons that fill the gap that help. Again, first thing being no gap. Put in your work experience, even if it's unpaid, put in consulting, put in volunteer work, whatever is relevant and showing the skill set you want to show. And then second best scenario is filling it with some kind of education. Yes, some form of professional development. Take a course, take a training, so that one, we can put that on your resume, and two, you just keep up with your skills, right? And lots of the programs today, even the free ones, give people a project they can do. They give them something to integrate the materials, and we want our clients the bullets on the resume. Those become the proof that they were actually taking that course. So I worked with a gentleman a while ago when the whole idea of machine learning was just coming into the picture, and he was taking a course from Coursera, free course on machine learning, and they were giving him projects to do. He was doing those projects. He was kind of creating his own projects to use the machine learning he was learning, and that's what he talked about in his resume. He was still working, but he was working in a field that was different where he wanted to go. And so he used that machine learning course and the projects from it to really show his skill sets in that direction that he wanted to go. And that's what we want our clients to be able to do when they're filling that gap or when they're making a transition. So the other research that I wanted to pull up here and show about gaps is something new that, for whatever reason, didn't receive a lot of news, but it's interesting to think about. And it's always, when we've been around this work for a while, nothing is maybe really that new, because for years I've been working with people that maybe had a large gap for raising kids. And so if they had current experience, we might bring in that old experience and just put X years experience. So let's say that I had one woman who'd been a nurse, and she'd come back to nursing school, and for about the last year, she'd been doing her practicum and those types of things. Before that, she had been helping out with her son's hockey team. And then like 10 years before that, she had 10 years experience as a nurse right before she had her kids. But we didn't want to put those 1980s dates on the resume. So we had put 1 year during her practicums and put that date, 2020 to 2021. Then we had the 2 years with her son's hockey team, and she was the, trainer. So it was medical, it was relevant. We talked about the medical side of that, and that was the 2 years, so 2018 to 2020. And then we said 10 years experience as a nurse. So we had dates on there for 2018 to 2020. And then we had 10 years experience as a nurse, no dates, because we didn't want to tell them how long ago that was in between the time she'd been raising her kids. So this article came out, and what this article did was they did a research study, and they sent in resumes that had just years of tenure. So the resume would just say 4 years experience, 3 years experience, 4 years experience, 5 years experience, no dates. And they got more calls back on those resumes than the ones that had no gap but used years. So 2018 to 2022, 2016 to 2018. Now, huge caveat is that this was done in the US, although in their discussion section, they say that it would translate. I don't know. One, I don't know how this would, I don't know that an applicant tracking system, I don't know what an applicant tracking system would do with this. And remember, an applicant tracking system doesn't kick people out, so recruiter would still look at it. But it's very interesting. And what it tells me is when there is an extreme reason to do so, I would experiment with just using tenure and see what happens. When someone just has a couple months here, a couple months there, even your person that had 7 months, I'd be hesitant to do this in the US. I don't know. You might make two different versions, one that has just tenure, 4 years, 3 years, 4 years, and one that has the dates, and see what you get. Do an experiment, right? But this is the results in the data that they got. And this is published in nature.com. I will go back and drop the link. I'll try again and see if I can put the link in or if it's going to mess it up. But they did, it's a pretty good, solid research study. I don't know if they accounted for applicant tracking systems. It was in the UK, so I still have some question marks about it. However, when you have those clients that either have a big gap from like raising kids and they don't necessarily want to put that in there, you could try tenure and see how it goes. So putting 4 years experience instead of 1990 to 1994, right? You could try that and see if it works for your client. I would be careful. I'd think about it, and I would not, even though they say that the years did better than even with someone with no gaps. For me, if there's no reason to do this, I would not do it. If someone has a good work history, use the dates. If someone has a good work history for the last 5 years, use the dates, and then you could try the tenure for the years before that. We don't want to make problems where there are not problems, right? So if someone has a work history that is more challenging, this research tells me that there's something that says I could try it and see how it might go. But I wouldn't do this if I didn't have to. I wouldn't do this if someone has a good linear work history. So when we are thinking about how we put together the resume, it's all about strategy. That's what I loved about resume writing, right? It's not the same thing every day. It's what is the best what is the best format? What's the best process? What's the best information for this client to demonstrate that they're qualified for that job? We have to know what they're aiming for. We have to have that focus, and then we can pull the pieces together. And it's why I love resume writing. It's why I love teaching resume writing, and it's why I love teaching resume writing the way that we teach resume writing, which is that we give you case studies that have a challenge, right? Somebody's changing and move up in their career, so that you can write not just the words and the formatting, but you can write to the strategy, and we can give you feedback on that strategy. And that's really what we need as resume writers, is the strategy piece beyond the writing and the formatting. How do we best connect our clients' connected material, their most relevant and interesting material, to the job that they're applying for today? And I hope this was helpful, looking at some gigs and gaps. I'll drop those other links down into the chat afterwards, and I'll see you next week for another trend topic. Thank you, everyone.